a forbidden access, right? So that is how I can protect my load balancer from known bad actors or bad IP addresses, right? Okay, now another thing that I want to do to optimize my web applications is configure a content delivery network, right? So what is a content delivery network? Well, okay, so imagine that I have a web server in the US, right? And I've got users over here in Europe, and I've also got in AP, right? Okay, now imagine that there's also a video file that these users want to browse, right? That this web server needs to serve, right? So if I do not have a content delivery network, every request to watch those video highlights of, let's say it's a World Cup or something like that, is going to have to go to the US and fetch the content to display, right? So what a CDN is, a content delivery network, is it is a system of caches that are close to the user, right? So that way, the first user who wants to watch the video is fetching the content, fetching the video content from the US. But after that, the content is placed in the CDN, right? So then the second user from Europe can get it from the CDN without having to go all the way to the origin server, right? So you can think of a CDN as a distributed cache for static web content, right? So if you have a geographically distributed user base, then typically you want to use CDNs, right? Now, Google Cloud has two types of CDNs. One is for standard web content, like images and so on. The other is optimized for streaming video, right? So they have different technical characteristics, but different use cases, right? So if we look at the locations, so let's just look at CDN locations. Now, basically, when we talk about a distributed cache, okay, so for example, if we look at Asia Pacific, okay, you can see that there's a list of locations where I have my CDN cache, right? So in some of these locations, I don't necessarily have a Google Cloud data center, but I do have the CDN cache. Like, for example, I don't think there's a Google Cloud data center in the Philippines or Thailand, but there is a cache. So if I'm having users accessing my website, they can fetch their content from the CDN cache, right? So, probably 60 to 70% of content on the web is served from a CDN, not necessarily Google CDN, but a CDN in general. So CDNs are well understood and popular technologies for optimizing the user experience on websites, right? Particularly for streaming content, they're essential. And you might say, how do I enable my CDN? Well, if I'm configuring an HTTP server, I can just enable it by clicking on the checkbox, right? Okay, so now we're going to talk about how we decide which type of load balancer to use. And as we already said, is it global? Is it regional? Is it external or is it internal? And also what protocol is being load balanced? So they're the key decisions, and there's a link there to more information in the documentation that you can review, right? Okay, so it gives you a kind of flow chart like this. So you see the first choice is external or internal, then I'm choosing the protocol and so forth. Right? Okay, so now we're going to talk about briefly about cloud DNS. So DNS, of course, is a popular is a key protocol on the internet. It maps names to IP addresses, right? So if you want to you set up your DNS in Google Cloud, you can do that by creating your names and mapping them to IP addresses. So Cloud DNS is just a service that you can configure in Google Cloud to map your domain names to IP addresses, right? Now, a lot of customers who are using Google Cloud may already have their DNS set up on-prem or in another service provider or whatever. So you don't have to use Cloud DNS to use Google Cloud. But if you want to host your DNS service in Google Cloud, you can with Cloud DNS, right? So, you know, that has all the advantages that any kind of application running on the Google infrastructure has: low latency, high availability, cost effective. But again, you don't have to use it. You can still use Google Cloud and use your own DNS if you want to. Okay, so another service we're going to talk about is Cloud NAT. And again, that's probably easier to demonstrate. But basically, the idea with Cloud NAT is if I have a virtual machine that does not have an external IP address, how is that virtual machine going to connect out to the internet to do things like download security patches, right? So I don't want to assign external IP addresses to my virtual machines for cost and security reasons. But then I have a problem that without a service like Cloud NAT, they won't be able to initiate outgoing connections to, for example, to download security patches. So Cloud NAT enables them to do that, right? So if we have a look at an example of that, just let me have a look here. So again, I'll just delete these other instances and just clean this up a little bit so I don't get confused about what's what. And we'll just delete that guy. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to create an instance without an external IP address. So we've done that before, but let's just do it now. And okay, so again, we basically do that by going down to networking and turning off the external IP address. And while we're just waiting for that to connect, we will connect to okay, now because okay, so what I'll do is G Cloud Compute SSH instance 1 and zone US central 1-A, right? So basically now I've got that instance. Let me just refresh. Okay, so you can see it doesn't have an external IP address, right?